Welcome back. Now, a lower inflation target for the Sarb is not a new suggestion. National Treasury is weighing in, hinting that it could look to lower that target. This is in a bid to make the economy more competitive and ease pressure on the local currency. A few moons ago, Jannie Rossouw, visiting a professor at Wits Business School, was assistant to the deputy governor and head of currency management at the Reserve Bank. He agrees with a lower inflation target and joins us with more insight. Thank you so much for your time, Jannie. Now, talk to us about the timing of this consideration by Treasury and what's held it back when the Sarb governor has been calling for it for a number of years.
Good afternoon to the viewers. South Africa has had inflation targeting for more than 20 years now. We've had the same target over this period. There was an idea of a lower target around 2003, which was never implemented. And in my view, it is time for a lower target in South Africa. We have to bring inflation structurally down in South Africa, also to anchor inflation expectations at a lower level. And that will give room for lower interest rates in South Africa going forward. However, lower inflation will also help to support the exchange rate of the rand, which will also be good for people with savings.
Jannie, let's talk about the issue of bringing it structurally down. What does that look like?
Well, in my view, South Africa needs an inflation target of about 2% per annum, probably with a range of 1 percentage point on each side of it, because inflation targeting is not such an accurate science. You have to have a bit of room for maneuver. So I would be in favor of 2% with a range of 1 percentage point on either side. This is also the right time to talk on this matter, because inflation target aspects are normally announced in budget speeches. So this is probably preparation for the MTBPS budget speech that we will have in October this year. And an inflation target must be agreed between the South African Reserve Bank and the National Treasury, because the Treasury sets the target for achievement by the South African Reserve Bank.
Quite interesting that you say that an appropriate inflation target would be 2%. And of course, lower inflation means a lower interest rate environment. But I'm actually wondering about the journey to that 2 or 3%. Would that mean then short-term pain for consumers for long-term gain?
Yeah, you can call it short-term pain for long-term gain. However, inflation is never a policy instrument. It's always an aberration, a result of bad policy. So for about 20 years, South Africa had inflation above 10% per annum. After 1989, from about 1992, we managed to get inflation structurally lower. And there's no reason why we can't get it structurally lower again to a level of about 2% per annum. But yes, as you call it, short-term pain for long-term gain.
Perhaps, Jannie, my question at this point is how? How would we get it structurally low to 2%? We haven't seen inflation of 2% over a long period of time here in South Africa.
But the important point that you have to remember is we don't only look at historic inflation when we talk about inflation targeting, we also look at expected inflation going forward. In other words, inflation expectations are very important in monetary policy. So the real trick is to anchor inflation expectations at 2% per annum, and then inflation will follow. So the Reserve Bank has now successfully changed inflation expectations from 6% per annum to 4.5% per annum, and they will then have the responsibility of bringing inflation structurally down to 2% and anchor it at that level going forward.
Jannie, could this maybe signal that the Reserve Bank needs a complete monetary policy overhaul?
No, this is quite achievable within the current monetary policy structure, with the Monetary Policy Committee responsible for monetary policy decisions. And then, of course, the Reserve Bank also responsible for the implementation of monetary policy once policy decisions have been taken by the Reserve Bank. So it's not an overhaul, it's just a new point where the Reserve Bank should focus and where the Reserve Bank should make every attempt to anchor inflation expectations going forward. And I must stress again, inflation is ungood. I'm against inflation. So if anything, I'm in favor of low inflation because inflation does not bring wealth to South Africans.
I must also ask you, Jannie, based on the reality that some of the inflation that we see here at home is imported, it does come from factors out of the control of the Reserve Bank, the National Treasury, or even you and me as ordinary South Africans. Would lower targeting be achievable based on that reality?
Well, of course, exchange rate movements play an important role in South African inflation. So hence my earlier remark that lower inflation will help to anchor the rand and keep the rand stable against international currencies. That will feed through to lower inflation in South Africa. That will also be beneficial for all of us in the long run.
Jannie, could also the government have a lot of work to do considering what is currently at play in terms of administered prices and their impact on a broader inflation?
Yes, of course, the government has a lot of work to do because the government plays an important role in this space. And the one thing, in my view, that the government should do is get rid of non-performing state-owned enterprises. I've said way back in 2015 or 2016, the government should simply give SAA away, it will never fly. Since then, the government has put 48 billion rands of taxpayers' hard-earned money in SAA, and they're now trying their best to sell half of it, and that's not going well. Likewise with the NEL, that's not published financial statements for the past 3 years, but the government keeps on helping these non-performing state-owned enterprises that are not mission critical for South Africa's future economic growth. What we need in South Africa is a focus on more rapid economic growth so that we can eradicate unemployment, get jobs for our people, because we owe it to South Africans who want to work to find them jobs to be able to work. That should be our focus in South Africa, and a lower inflation target will support such a focus.
Well, Jannie, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time and insights this afternoon. That was visiting professor at Wits Business School, Jannie Rossouw.